Welcome to the Kanban Coaching Exchange. Great to see you all this evening. Very excited to have James Enock joining us today from Adaptavis. He was due to join us a couple of weeks ago, but the power of the illness was succumbed, and so we've had to reschedule tonight. So thank you for coming for us again, James. I've known James a while, actually. Has his own business, Adaptavis, coach, trainer, vastly experienced in both Scrum and Kanban ways of working. And more recently, through Kanban Edge, which David Spinks and I organised, we got to hear about his case study of how he used fit for purpose within one of his businesses. And it had such positive reviews that I thought, let's get him along to the Kanban Coaching Exchange. And also this way I get to see it as well. So, great guy. I'm going to hand over to you, James. Welcome to the Kanban Coaching Exchange. Take it away.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yep. All good.
Great. Okay. And you can see the screen as well.
All good.
Superb. Okay. So this is a talk about how we help transform an organization. It is an EV charging solutions company. It's based in the Netherlands, although they've got a global footprint. I'm going to take you through. I'll give a quick overview of the Fit for Purpose framework for those that haven't used it or are familiar with it, but it will be very quick. And then just introduce a little bit of the Kanban Maturity Model, because those were the things that really helped us to drive the change in this particular organisation. I'll give you a bit of a backdrop to the situation we found ourselves in, why they asked us to come in and help. Some of the things that we did, so we share some of the techniques, and then at the end I'll translate that into what value was delivered and what benefit the organisation got from that. So what I'll do is I'll go through the talk and the story, and then what I'll do is I'll ask people for any questions at the end, if that's okay, just so that we can get through all of the slides. And then sometimes I get asked questions, but if you just waited until the next slide, you'd get the answer. So if we can hold off questions to the end, that's fantastic. Okay, so some of you may be aware of the Fit for Purpose framework, but it's a framework that helps you understand what your customers are really trying to achieve, so that you can design, measure, and improve your products and services based on how well they meet those specific purposes. Okay, so that's really what the framework's about. It's really driving to understanding why your customers buy you. And what we find in a lot of organizations, they're swimming in data. And when we get them to tell us what they're measuring, all of them are operational metrics. None of them are really customer focused. Maybe you've got NPS in there, but it's not a really good measure for understanding why people buy you. The other framework that I want to introduce you to, if you're not aware of it, is the Kanban Maturity Model. And the reason that I want to show you this is that we come back to this a number of different times, and you'll see some of the language that's used in some of the slides that I'm going to show you, and it ties back to the maturity model. We don't generally share this with clients. We use the language which is tied to the business to really help them or to paint a picture of where they are and where they can go to, what sort of benefits they can get through improving the performance of the business. Okay, so a couple of takeaways for this particular talk is one, talk the business or the language of the business. So when we're transforming organizations, we're transforming from top to tail. And in this particular organization, they're selling charge points, they're providing a network for people to charge on the go, they've got depot charging, etc., etc. And if you're going to have influence in the boardroom, you really need to be talking the language of the people that you're engaging with. Make the change contextual. So this is really important. This will resonate with you folks, being Kanbanners, starting with what you do now, not making assumptions or introducing frameworks which might not work in that environment and therefore might be a bit disingenuous to the client to make that assumption and force it on them. understand that systems are messy. Okay, so when I go through this, I'm going to be talking about some of the challenges they had with technology, some of the challenges they had with an acquisition. But throughout all of this, we need to maintain a respect for the people that are working at the systems. They don't necessarily design them, and they're often trying to do a good job despite the systems they're forced to work with. And the other one is really guide and encourage people on their journey. And this one was particularly important for this organization. They're a very small organization to start with. The people in the roles, whilst they were working in a smaller organization, they were probably okay. But as soon as they moved into a much bigger organization, they found themselves maybe without some of the capability that you'd expect from the training and experience that we provided them as they went through that journey. So, this is a story about an established EV charging network provider in the Netherlands. Basically, they allowed access to their chargers to public users, so EV drivers, and they provided them with a card. And so the card allowed them to go up to a charger, park the car, plug the car in, and hopefully start a charging session. And hopefully is a key word in the story, by the way. The business was acquired in 2017. And by 2022, this is what it looked like. So we've gone from providing a network and some public charging and a card to now fleet and depot charging, charging at home, charging on the go, solar panels, batteries, wind farms. And not only that is that they've gone from just working in the Netherlands to now working in multiple countries. So to give you an idea of the scale up that happened, in 2020, there were only 181 people. By 2023, early 2023, there were 900 people. Okay, so that's very rapid growth. So again, just a reminder that the smaller company was bought by a bigger company, and they were facing a lot of challenges. And some of these challenges were expansionist dreams. So the mothership wanted to play in the whole of market, but they weren't set up for that yet. So it'd gone from a small company where the systems would work just about, and you could do some manual stuff, to now we've got this huge organization that needs to do a lot more. And so things, because of the strategy to go to whole of market, it meant that the systems couldn't cope with the demand. We've got distrust. So many employees who are green at heart distrusted the mothership due to its background in fossil fuels, and also fears of slow bureaucratic processes, things that they hadn't had to deal with as a smaller startup company. Clarity on ownership. So it was really difficult for the leadership team to understand where things needed to go. And so lots of things found themselves homeless. So let's say, for instance, you needed to do a project for on the go. It was really difficult to give that a home and for someone to take on ownership of it. Linked to that was the productivity killing silos. So silos which led to a lot of tribalism, very much focused on outputs and a lot of protecting my patch. So long as my team's okay, then that's good. And a lot of the reward systems were built around that. So, for instance, when we did discovery, we went to get to know these folk. We would speak to, say, the inside sales teams. They were rewarded for booking sales, but they weren't sure where they went. You go and speak to the next person downstream, and they go, "Those pesky inside sales folk just send us a load of rubbish." So very, very disjointed. And really difficult for the leadership team that inherited all of these problems to get their heads around, especially with a lot of the pressure that was coming from above. As I mentioned previously, rapid growth. And so integration of new employees itself presented an issue, the cultural differences. You've got groups of people coming from a large fossil fuel business into a very sort of fast moving emergent market. So things like asking for 10-year plans when things change every month, that type of thing. Prioritization, very ad hoc, very chaotic, and definitely based on HIPPO. No data-driven decisions were being made, but lots of data being created, very little insight being created from that data. And then overburdening of people. So people felt overburdened, confused. It's very difficult to align people. So direction became very, very difficult for the leadership team. And a lot of people were exhausted. A lot of people were off on long-term sick. And so it wasn't a great place to be in. And if you think about what I said earlier, the leadership team here had inherited these problems. Okay, so they've got legacy platforms, a high degree of failure demand. So I think at one point, every charger that was sold generated 3 to 7 calls to the call center. Okay, lots of manual processes that worked for a small workforce, that worked for a small amount of demand, didn't work now for a much bigger organization. And then just to put some icing on the cake, COVID came along. They had supply chain issues. There was a global chip shortage, which isn't good if you're using chips in the provision of hardware. Okay, so if you think about the leadership team here, they had a huge burden. None of this was of their design or making. They'd been asked to come in and solve these problems. Okay, so in 2021, they reached out to us and a couple of other vendors as well, to be honest, or so to say consultancies, not vendors. I don't like that word. And said, look, can you come and help us? What we would like to do is we need to create a red thread or a golden thread through the organization to connect strategy and goals at all levels. We need a consistent process that helps us face off into the wider organization, but that allows people to work in a more effective way. We need some training. So we recognize that, perhaps the capability of the staff isn't where we need them to be. And so we need you to come and give them some training and help them out. We need tooling. So we need a tooling configured. We need to be able to understand how the organization works. And more importantly, we want you to come and help build capability into the organization. And that was really key for them. They're very, very focused on the people. The leadership team was, and they wanted to provide their people with every opportunity to be able to do their jobs effectively and actually enjoy doing it. So what we suggested is, look, we need to get to know you. Okay. And if you've ever worked in the Netherlands, you might get these emails that just say GTKY, and that's all there is in the meeting. And it's like, we want to get to know you. Right? And so this is a bit about us getting to know the client. So Adaptavis, understanding them, and then really getting to know us and building trust. So what we really need to understand when we go in and we start a transformation is, what is your strategy? Yeah. What do your customers think about you? How do you manage your portfolio, make trade-off decisions so you're working on the right things? And then how does delivery and operations work? So remember what I said earlier, this isn't just about software delivery. They're providing hardware to people, as well as providing software solutions through apps, etc., etc. So we apply a systems thinking model to understand the performance of a system. This isn't the model. It's just a way for us to communicate things. And if you think about the thinking that goes into a system, that shapes the purpose. The purpose informs the demand. The demand tests the capability, which affects the flow of work. And then you've got system conditions, external and internal. So flows are influenced by these systems conditions, and the systems conditions shape the thinking. So if you go back to what was going on in the COVID period and what was going on with the global chip shortage, that was affecting the thinking of the people that were managing the business. And it was also affecting the flow of work. And so once we understand that we need to understand the system, and it's a systems thinking approach we need to take, we came up with the systems thinking approach to understanding strategy. So you may notice that it's very similar to static, but actually in this instance, we're not introducing Kanban, we're trying to understand how your business performs. Okay, so the first thing that we want to do is we want to know what your strategy is. And the strategy was to achieve X% of market through sales of CPUs. So if you see me looking that way, I've got to look at it that because it's on the bigger screen and your faces are covering this bit. Okay, and so the purpose of the system then was to sell CPUs, and these are charge point units. Okay, at the other end, we need to see how good are we at executing our strategy based on purpose. So the first thing we do is we model potential demand. We then model their actual demand. We model the sales and customer acquisition conversion. We look at we model the product and service delivery fulfillment, model customer experience and retention, and then model the business outcomes. And at the same time, assessing the overall performance at each stage, looking at things like how long does it take, how much failure demand is generated at which point, where are the churn rates, where are the bottlenecks, where are our leverage points. So to bring that to life a little bit, so we're looking at the target addressable market, so the TAM, segment addressable market, and the segment obtainable market. And then we're looking at where the demand comes from. So you've got direct to customer, it's coming through the OEMs, it's coming through resellers, it's coming through the lease. Okay. And then what we do is we look at the whole intake, the proposal, installation, deals complete, CPUs in use, and the outcomes, and then determine whether you're fit for purpose for the strategy that you're trying to execute. Okay, and so this is just a picture of it. The red things there are leverage points or bottlenecks or things that we need to have a look at. And so when we go through and we do this, we speak to everyone that's involved in the value chain. So everyone from the sales folk, the inside sales, the operations, the installers. We look at all the systems, we understand all of the data, and we look at the user journey as well. And then once we've done that, we end up with a picture like this. Okay, so this is a portion of the real one. And for the purposes of this particular talk, I'm only talking about customers who charge at home. We actually looked at customers who charge on the go, which is a lot more complex. And I definitely wouldn't be able to talk about that in an hour. We also look at the fleet side of the business and depot side. And we map it all out and then play this back. And so I remember Toby, who was the transformation lead at this particular client, saying we could now see the state of the business. So we could feel all the pain, but we didn't understand what was going on. And what was really nice here is he said it took the emotions out of any conversation and presented us with facts rather than pet theories. So what was happening is that everyone had a theory about why things weren't working out, but there was no real alignment, and this brought it to life for them. And what we found out as well is that all of the demand came through the same process, whether it is direct to customer, business to business, B2B to C. Everyone was getting the same experience. Okay. That wasn't agreed on before. No one could agree on that. And it became a really important part of the transformation. So the next bit that we do is we look at what your customers are saying. So no contact, no charge point, useless company, avoid. Worst company I've ever dealt with. Absolute disgrace. The staff should feel ashamed to work here. Waited months for an installation, still waiting. Trying to call on the phone for 30 minutes, waiting to be picked up. Get called a liar. Right? Complete con by this company and the so-called complimentary installation. So now that we can see what's going on, and every week these were shared within the company, and every week everyone had their head in their hands. This isn't why they came to work. So what we came to after all of this, we agreed that we had the wrong operating model. Okay, and that whilst we had customer centricity in the values, it was clear that they didn't really have much customer centricity at all. So they've got a very high work rate, very, very slow delivery. Revenue in decline, so stalled growth. Lack of alignment, no transparency. Very overburdened people and overburdened teams. Low customer awareness and very poor customer service. And so not fit for purpose in any way, shape or form. So what we did is we tried to bring this to life in a very factual way for them. And we used some of the language from KMM at this point. So we said, look, we've looked at your company and it's very tactical, chaotic, unaligned and reactionary. Yeah, it's very siloed. So if you look at all of these customer requests that are coming in for charge points, etc., they've got to hop through loads and loads of different teams. We don't know what our capability is, yet we're taking lots of demand and we're not able to fulfill it. The calls are going through the roof. And, we're at the point now where the customer care area is incentivized to reduce the cost of customer calls. So, of course, the inevitable thing is we're now thinking about offshoring it, outsourcing it somewhere rather than actually fixing the problems, because there isn't really much joined up thinking. Projects, again, they would go through lots of different teams, very difficult to test things, very difficult for people to take ownership. And then improvements were only done in the silos. So information flow, communication, very unstable and slow. The purpose of the system seemed to be sell CPUs, measure EBITDA, and also number of subscriptions. And so the thinking really that's been applied in this organization is resource efficiency and division of labor. Okay. And so what we need to do is we need to get you to a point where you're fit for purpose in the eyes of the customer. Okay. You're focusing on the flow of work and collaborating around common goals. Okay. I just threw that one in there because it's nice. And we need faster and more predictable communication. And so we need to understand why you exist in the eyes of the customer and what you do. So we need to segment and organize your business around customer purpose. So that allows us to become operational, explainable, anticipatory. Okay, so you recognize some of the language here. Okay, and so what we observed within the organization is that on a maturity level, they're between 0 and 1. Okay, but heavily weighted towards 0. But they desperately wanted to become fit for purpose. And so this is where we needed to bring things to life. So one of the great things about Kanban Maturity Model is it doesn't tell you what these things are, product lines and shared services, which means that we're able to create something in the context that we're working in. So I've spoken to other people about product lines, shared services. A lot of it's around IT, not around the business. And so at this level, we need to go back to what I was talking about earlier, speaking the language of the business. Now, if we're talking about product lines and shared services in the way we are, we need to understand marketing. We need to understand product. We need to understand how companies make money. We need to understand customer experience, user experience, those types of things, if we're going to help organizations move to this level of maturity. So, as I said, we didn't have a picture for what this looked like. And so I had to bring it to life for people. And so I remember drawing this on a board at some point and saying, well, look, we need to align people from all of these different departments behind your customer purpose. Okay, so we need people from product management, strategy, sales and marketing, pricing, finance, CX, UX, customer care, legal, rather than having these people work in their own silos. But they need to be aligned to, we were wanting to call them business lines. But because of the size of the business we were operating in, it was difficult. For a business line for them, that might be oil refinement, which is significantly bigger than a business line about charging at home. So we called them value streams. And that was something that wasn't used within the wider organization. And so that's what they called them, value streams. And so the value streams examples, the one we're talking about here is charging at home. The other one's charging on the go. Okay. So the next thing that we talked to them about was strategy expressed as OKRs. So top of house, we needed to be able to align people and we needed to be able to make good decisions. And so we also needed a strategic portfolio so that based on the direction of travel, you could apportion a percentage of the budget to each of the value streams. Okay. So then underneath this, we've obviously got to have lightweight delivery governance. Remember, we're facing off into a very bureaucratic organization. So not talking about governance is a really bad idea. And then we've got shared services. And in this instance, the shared services were the IT folk, because the business people were in the customer purpose aligned teams. And then, of course, you've got to build it right. And one of the reasons that this was really important for them was they had a huge amount of technical debt. And I remember, the challenge that the then new CTPO had, and he was talking me through it. And I was just like, yeah, I don't envy you at all. So they had to sort all of that out as well. And then, of course, we need a strategy management system, communities of practice, ways of working, training, coaching, and mentoring. And so this is a suggestion of what anyone should do. This is how we communicated what a fit for purpose, maybe moving to a risk hedge business might look like. So that people could visualize it. And I remember talking to the boss of the CEO at the time, and he said, "Can I have this slide? Because I now understand how to run the business." Yeah, this has brought it to life for me. Okay, so that was the easy bit, the drawing. Okay, so now we had to overcome some challenges. So once we started communicating this to people, it became really clear that people had a real different understanding of what customer centricity meant. So for me, product centric is sell as many like units to as many nameless, faceless people as you possibly can. Customer centricity is really about understanding your customer, yeah, getting intimate with them, okay, building customer lifetime value. The other bit that was a challenge was legacy segmentation. So before we started talking about customer purpose, they're a very sales-led organization, yeah, focus on selling products, CPUs, and so actually the segmentation was by sales channel. And that was something that was built into the organization from ground up. The other challenge we had as well is we're now taking these people out of their, say, their marketing role and their finance role and putting them together with a common purpose. And so the managers were like, yeah, but they're my resources and they're busy. Okay. And then the people that were coming on, how am I supposed to do my day job when my manager keeps giving me work to do? Okay, but I think the aha moment came when the people that were on the value streams and it started to bed in realized they were doing the same work, but in a different way, and one that was designed to remove burden from them. Okay, so one of the other challenges that we had when we go in and we talk about fit for purpose, there isn't necessarily an instruction manual on how to do it. You're asking people to do something in a different way. They understood jobs to be done and strategizer. And so we said, well, why don't we just bring this up? And why don't we start from here? Okay, so what we did is we looked at some of the jobs to be done. So set up charging before car delivery, charge overnight without stress, manage energy use efficiently. And then we looked at the pains they had with them, high electricity bills, space constraints, etc., and the things they wanted to gain. So they wanted an acceptable charging time, smart scheduling, support when they need it, charge enough for my journey, etc. And then map some of the products and services on the side. So this isn't a complete picture, by the way. This is just to give you an idea of what we did and connect you to some of the tools that we use to help us introduce fit for purpose. And then we looked at their pains and their gains for some of these things and then marked them. Okay, so we said, what are we good at? What are we getting complained at? We had a lot of data from the customer call center. Obviously, you've seen the stuff on Trustpilot, which was useful for getting information, but we had to mine that an awful lot because there's no taxonomy around the numbers. There's also no connection to purpose. So you've got to mine it and find out what they're saying in order for it to be useful. The other thing as well is it's very noisy. So what we were finding in the Trustpilot data was you didn't deliver your charger on time. So it's not installed. I can't charge my car. And you're telling me it's going to be another 200 days before I get my charger. Okay. And then they were giving a high score on Trustpilot because they got a good experience from customer service. So it's really, really noisy data. It took a long time to get through and mine some of that stuff. Okay, so these are some fitness criteria. These aren't the ones they used, but it will give you an idea of a fit for purpose scorecard. So price, so they've got a threshold. People are willing to pay $650 to $750 for one of these things. Aesthetically pleasing might be a criterion. So they might want one or two designs with a selection of colors, all the way up to being fully customizable. And they may be willing to pay more for that. Built to last, backed up by warranty, so maybe 5 to 7 years. Cost to charge. Now, they're not providing energy to the customer, so they can't control the cost of the energy. So in order to manage cost to charge, they need to provide scheduling. And so what they might do is they might provide scheduling at the lowest threshold through the app manually, which is actually regulation now. But also they might want to provide automatic scheduling to optimize for best tariffs. And in fact, that's becoming the threshold of acceptance throughout the industry since we moved on from here. Charging speed, 3.7 kilowatts to 22 kilowatts. These days, no one wants a 3.7 kilowatt, so we don't want to sell those things. Safety meets regulations, and then on-time installation. So they want the installation 2 to 4 weeks before delivery of the car. Now, if we go to 5 weeks, 6 weeks, 7 weeks, we might be over-serving, and we'd be best using the installers to do some other stuff. Under 2 weeks, we're getting calls to the call center because we're now worried the charger's not going to turn up. And then installation quality. So we want the thing to work. I mean, ultimately, people are buying these things because they want to charge their car. And so they want confidence that they're going to be able to do that so they can do their drive. Okay, so once we've measured all of those things, or we've come up with these things to do, we need to be able to measure the performance of the business through instrumenting real-time service performance and giving the organization the ability to have a clear view on where to focus to run a healthy product line. So don't look into these too much. They've deliberately been changed. They're deliberately wrong, but they'll give you an idea of what a dashboard might look like. And so this was the customer focused view. And on the right, you've got health indicators. So these are more operational. Over here on the left, you've got things like first time right for the customers. These are improvement drivers at the moment, that type of stuff. And then lead time for delivery of the charger and installation. You can see that going down over a period of time. So we've got all of these things. Numbers shown are indicative for illustrative purposes, but they're now allowing us to see what's going on. They're now allowing the organization to understand how it's performing in the eyes of the customers. And therefore, are they driving to a healthy business? Now, you can get a resilient and robust business most of the time by giving the customers what they want. Okay, if you don't do that, it tends to increase a lot of your operational cost. Calls to the call center, people spent time on failure demand rather than doing other stuff. Okay, so we've got that. And then from the on-the-go solution, so charging on the go, we wanted to put in monitoring solutions. So a lot of the calls that they were getting, a lot of the frustration from drivers on the go was setting up a successful charging session. And as you can see here, about 80% of the charging wasn't successful. Okay, so we developed a monitoring solution from the ground up to give the operational leaders the ability to make data-driven decisions and understand what was going on. Now, back here in 2022, January, the delay cost for this was 3 million euros a month. So because people couldn't start the charging session, they were losing 3 million a month. And through the work we did and the interpretation of their data, identifying the root causes of the issues and allowing them to proactively solve these problems, they went from 50% to around 80%. That's worth around 30 million, just through the focusing on the customer's need, which was, I want to turn up and the charger works when I'm driving my car. Okay. Previously, they had none of this insight. So we'll get a couple of quotes here. So this is what the at-home value stream lead said. Fit for purpose forced us to confront the truth about our performance and gave us the tools to act on it. We're no longer managing in the rearview mirror. We can see what matters to our customers in real time and adjust our strategy accordingly. Okay, these were the key results and the business impact. So improved customer satisfaction, improved employee satisfaction, 60% reduction in lead times, 32 million euros additional revenue in 12 months, and the identification of 70 million opportunity by looking at delay costs. So we helped them implement an economic framework that allowed them to use CD3 in order to decide which things they were going to work on, rather than working on the Hippo's pet project. Okay, these numbers came from the head of transformation, Toby Corbelis. That's Toby. Toby was the head of transformation for the company. He now works with me at Adaptavis. So when he left the client, about a year after we finished with them, he approached me and said, "Hey, look, that was brilliant. I loved the way that you guys did that and helped us, and I want to do some more of that. Can I come and join you?" So he invested his cold hard cash, and he is now a partner at Adaptavis. And this is a reflection on the transformation. So this came from a conversation between the CEO and Toby. And what she said to him is, what stood out most for me was, by the time Adaptavis had finished, I knew where to go for anything that came to the business. It might not be prioritized, but I knew it would be in the right place and handled properly. Before they started, everything was a succession of burning platforms and nothing got done. So what we were saying here is that we'd help them create an organization that they could manage now effectively. They could see what was going on. They could prioritize the right things at the right time. There was alignment and ownership for the areas of the business that serve the customers. Okay, so a couple of other things that I wanted to share with you, because some of you may recognize these things, or working with OKRs and balanced scorecards, etc. So now that we were focused on the customer, it was really interesting, the conversations that we could start to have. So over here, we've got an objective: deliver a superior at-home experience to increase market share in the UK, with the key results: achieve NPS of 50 plus. And the other one is increase UK market share from 5% to 10% by acquiring 30,000 new customers. That's not one of their OKRs, by the way. It's an example to give you an example of the intent. Okay, so then we've got a balanced scorecard. Some of you may be used to seeing these within organizations when you work with C-level execs. And so generally, they tend to give you a number of different lenses. Two of them here are the customer and financial. At this point, we hadn't integrated the fit for purpose criteria into the scorecard itself, but it allowed us to start having conversations. So what we could see from business health was number of charges in stock wasn't the right amount for us to be able to install them. Okay. Production lead time for chargers was massive. Number of calls to the call center was going up. Okay. And so what we were missing was our key fitness criteria. People wanted on-time installation of a working charger so they could charge their car when they took delivery. Now, when we started to look at this, we found out that there's a central warehouse in the Netherlands that supplies all the chargers. And so now we've moved into multiple different geographical locations. We've still got to get the chargers from one place. And they didn't have a warehouse in the UK at the time. And so we were able to start having conversations and trying to understand why. Now, one of the constraints they had was capital in inventory. And so they were trying to keep capital inventory to a minimum. But because capital inventory was a restriction, so it wasn't enabling, it was causing customers to not get their charges on time, to call the call center. And the other problem is that all of their other metrics were getting hit. So profitability is being hit because we can't get the charger installed and we can't get the money off the customer. Profitability is getting hit because calls to the call center are going through the roof. Our customer acquisition is down because people are reading the Trustpilot reviews and going, don't want to do business. Customer retention is down. No one's referring customers. Our market share isn't increasing based on our strategic desires. Customer satisfaction's down and net promoter score's down. So they were still using net promoter score, which is fine, but that was down. And so all of these things were being hit by capital in inventory, but now we were able to have a grown-up conversation because we were focused on the customer. And so we could understand what we needed to do to change internally in order to start becoming fitter for purpose. Okay, so some of the takeaways. Again, remember to talk the language of the business. Yeah, as soon as we get outside maturity levels 0 and 1, we're talking the language of products, services. We're moving into the world of marketing. Yeah, we need to understand sales. We need to understand economics. We need to understand how people are making money, how the business works. So we need to talk the language of the business if we really want to help organizations transform. We need to make this change contextual. So as I explained at the beginning, the first bit we did is to get to know them. Actually, a lot of the stuff we did wouldn't have come from any framework whatsoever. Okay, and so installing a framework would have been a pointless waste of money, and we wouldn't have done a good job. The other thing to remember as well is that, we're talking about all of these problems, and systems are messy, especially when you've grown rapidly. You've got a lot of manual things to do. You're not joined up. People still have to operate in these things. So we need to be respectful of the people, and then guide and encourage people on their journey, build that capability in. Okay, so that's the talk. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about Adaptavis. Okay, this is what we do. We deliver value faster, make the invisible visible, deliver change that sticks. What we don't do is force change on you, drown you in theory, or beat around the bush. We're straight talking pragmatic and provide actionable advice. Okay, so these are some of the friends we made along the way. And I'm going to open up the floor for questions.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, James. Let's give him a round of applause for appreciation. I have got a question in the chat channel from Noaz. The question is, this is when you had that first picture, that big picture of the lighthouse on. It looks very much like a value stream map. If so, curious to understand what was done to understand the value streams that align with the strategy.
So it is a value stream to a certain degree, but it goes into a lot more detail. So what we were doing was really trying to understand how every single step that things went through, every single process, every single bit of technology, how all of that worked, and then put data points on all of it. So it was a bit like a value stream map, but I think it goes into a lot more detail than that, and it ties back to the purpose of the system. I don't know if I've answered the question well.
Sure, Noaz will tell us if you haven't.
Yeah, I think you did. Like that question got answered, I think, on a couple of slides later when you explain how you did the organization design, right? Where you take us through the customer purpose and all the segments. I think that is where I think you talked about some of the value streams that work was done there.
Yeah,
so I think
we wanted to call them business lines, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how, when we worked with the head of these value streams, we said, look, think of it as a business line, but don't worry about the P&L for now. The P&L will come. And what was interesting about that is because of the way that we'd set them up, this company has now sold their at-home business. And I was speaking to someone recently, and I just said, did what we did help the sale of that portion of the business? And he said, absolutely, yes. There were still challenges around technology, but it was a lot easier to sell that part of the business because of the way that it was set up. So for us, it was really about, it being more than product lines and shared services. It was really about setting these business lines up, knowing that the market's changing and being able to read the signals about where people are going to, place their bets. This particular company is placing their bets more on the go market and not on the home market. They were in the home market because they wanted the customer lifetime value that comes from integration and selling them energy. You'll notice that most of the big fossil fuel companies exited the retail energy business. because they couldn't get their energy onto the grid and sell it.
Brilliant. Silky, your question?
Yes, a very easy question. I was actually interested or curious how the Trustpilot reviews were afterwards.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I've not gone back and looked. But they did report that a year after they had their first positive NPS. Right. So things are going in the right directions. I think they started to recover from the chip shortage. Quality issues increased, but they were still challenged in making money from that business. I think
Right.
you'll probably notice that most of the at-home charging companies are struggling to make money from selling chargers one time. So they're looking at ways to tie people into subscriptions and get a much closer relationship with the customer, and therefore get better customer lifetime value.
Would be interesting. You could include it in your presentation if it was like 5 stars from now on.
Oh no, it wouldn't have been 5 stars.
Any star would be good.
Yeah, or like at least 2 is an improvement.
Yeah. Well, to be honest, one of the reasons that I put the Trustpilot stuff in there was that it's in the public domain. So I couldn't get told off for sharing something that was in the public domain. And I picked out a few. I mean, the other ones were really interesting, like never buy a Volvo because they do a deal with these charge point operators. I mean, that's pretty drastic.
Okay. I'm going to
there
go
you
to a
go.
question in the chat channel, if that's all right. Spinksy, I'll come to you next. So this one's from Chris Davies, so he's still here. If I understood you correctly, you restructured the organisation around value streams to break down the departmental silos. Can you explain how you did that while maintaining respect for the people? How did you get buy-in for the change?
So this was an interesting one, and it came about because we needed to do a pincer. So we needed to start with where you are. We also needed to face off into the mothership, and people were really open for doing whatever needed to be done. Now, when we came up with this is what it could look like, I think everyone was like, oh, yeah, we can see how this would work. So there was a great degree of commitment to make it happen. It took a while to bed in because of some of those challenges. They're my resources, and people not really sort of, knowing why they were on the value stream. So the communication could have been a little bit better. But by the time we left, people from pricing were chipping in on, finance work, and they were working together on the value propositions, and they were deciding what the next thing to do was together. And so they ended up with a great degree of autonomy, which allowed them to really do what they needed to do. So it was buy-in from the top and permission to fail and learn as best they can. Now, the leadership team here, I said, inherited all of this stuff. We're a really forward-thinking bunch of people, and they genuinely cared about their staff. But also they needed to fundamentally shift the way that they interacted with the mothership. And so I think there was an element of, I'm going to have to tell you a little bit to do this, but I'm going to give you support in order to make it happen. There was an element of time sensitivity. Hopefully that answers your question, Chris.
David, over to you.
Thank you. In the Fit for Purpose framework, I know there's a lot of emphasis on the customer frontline facing staff, basically, and using the narrative that comes from that to drive that direction. You talked about you had all this data coming from the call center. I'm just wondering, in an organization which is as complex as the one that you've described, how was that sort of facilitated in terms of like making sure that there's alignment from this information coming from the frontline staff with a strategy, and it's not just the hippo saying it, it's just looking at raw data or the Trustpilot reviews. How did you facilitate that sort of closer sort of frontline experience with the direction?
Oh, sorry. Yes, we worked with the customer service folk. Normally, what we'd do when we do discovery is we'd go and sit in the call centres and we'd listen in on calls. But because of COVID, we weren't able to do that. But we did work with the customer service area, and there were representatives from customer service within each of the value pods. And so once the value streams had come together, what they started to do was to help the call center get relief from overburdening and solve some of the customer issues that they were facing by prioritizing the work and the complaints that were coming through the call center. So actually the value streams were responsible for prioritizing the work that the call center needed them to solve. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. For the immediate tactical stuff, I'm just thinking more like, all right, what do we need to change in terms of like improving the overall service that we're delivering to our customers? So the input into the strategy, I suppose, from the customer. How did that sort of get facilitated, if you see what I mean?
Right, okay. So they had lots of customer research. They did start to ask the customer. One of the challenges that we had, certainly with the home business, was that charges that should have been delivered within 30 days were sometimes taking 300. So you could ask the customer why they originally chose to buy you, but you couldn't necessarily get the information about how well we did at the time. So they split the survey to ask them why they purchased them, and then they went back and they asked them how they did. But for those purchasing reasons, it was very, very clear from the call center and from the Trustpilot why they weren't fit for purpose. People just wanted their charger ready for when their car turned up so they could charge their car. It was that simple. Okay. So all of that was tied in together. Now on the go, we actually went out and we traveled across the Netherlands and into Germany, a big like convoy of us. And we went and asked loads of people. So we went up to them in the service stations and we were actually asking them and getting information out. And then at one point they hired a load of people to go to the service stations and ask them the fit for purpose or to fill out the fit for purpose questionnaire.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned that your leadership were the leadership were very open to looking at that data. They weren't like they didn't have their own agendas. They were taking that on board.
These guys were very closely aligned. One of the things that we did as well with them is that once we'd shown them what was going on, we actually took them to Arnhem in the Netherlands, and we did a big strategy day around it. Which was it was designed to get them aligned and talking, and it came away sort of you could see a huge difference. They now knew what they needed to do to manage the business, and they were very supportive of it.
Cool. Thank you.
Last question, Silky, over to you. You're on mute, my dear. You're still on mute.
Sorry, I thought I had clicked it. You just mentioned the fit for purpose questionnaire. Is that the fit for purpose kind of cards that we know?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. But we changed it as well because obviously we want to be able to go back to people and ask them questions as well. So it was a variation on the one that's on the Kanban Plus site. The other thing as well for these folk, if you've read the Fit for Purpose book, there's a section about NPS and why it's not good. What we actually found is that we needed to keep it because it was a selection criteria of the fleet managers.
Mm-hmm.
So whilst it's not useful in the context of customer purpose, actually it was part of the RFP process for the fleet managers, and so had to be there.
Okay, a bit like red squirrel, gray squirrel, or
yeah. And we're both living side by side,
right?
but I think I was going to draw a light on something else then as well. So the other thing that we found as well, and this was an interesting one, is that you wouldn't normally purchase something for customer service. Okay, so as an individual, customer service tends not to be a buying decision unless you've had a bad, experience with someone before. But when you're selling to fleet managers, actually customer service is one of their criterion for purchasing. So whilst it's not for the individuals that charge at home, it is for the fleet managers in choosing a provider. They want to make sure that the customer service is good so they don't have to do it themselves. They're outsourcing that. And so you need to be able to provide SLAs to them, that sort of stuff. Yes, we uncovered lots and lots of different things. The most complicated one was on the go, because they were providing the ability to charge, but they didn't own the forecourts. They didn't own the overall experience. I mean, we drove out there, we all pulled up, 4 of us wanted to go to the bathroom, but we couldn't go to the bathroom because you needed a Maestro card to pay 50 cents to be able to go and use the bathroom. Of course, we don't use Maestro in the UK. We use Visa or MasterCard or Amex. And so none of us could go to the toilet. But the premise is on the fossil fuel business is you don't make any money on the petrol. Yeah, all of the money comes from the retail. And so whilst they were charging you 50p to go in and use the toilet, they were giving you that back as a voucher to buy something in the retail outlet. So if you think about us, we pulled over to use the toilet. The charging was brilliant. Like, it just worked. But actually, my purpose in that situation was, going to the bathroom, and you couldn't do it. And you couldn't control that. So people were giving you bad scores because the overall value proposition wasn't cohesive. So, yeah, we uncovered lots and lots of stuff by using the fit for purpose framework. And we were designing a lot of this stuff at the same time as we were doing it.